Omari Scott. I am an hockey coach at Corey's Yacht Club. I also work with the US National Team. Today what I want to talk about is a little bit about some of the key elements that go into having a good start. A lot of people know, or most people will say, that having a good start is, some people say 60%, 70%, some people say different. That goes into having a really good race. So basically I want to just kind of touch a little bit on that. As it takes up so much, or it's worth so much to having a good race, I want to talk about all the elements that go into someone having a good start and how it really helps you to have a good race. So there's a lot of elements that goes into it, and we want to touch on a little bit of each, and maybe at the end of the video we can help you guys out to having good starts going forward. One of the things I want to talk about, one of the first things we have to talk about is just preparation, right? When you go into any sport, preparation is key. When preparing for a start, I always tell sailors that starting is, preparing for a race is just like studying for a test. Every start, every race course, every race is a test, and if you don't prepare for your test, you will fail it. So it's the same thing with sailing. Every race is the same. Every start is the same. In order for you to have a great race, you have to study the race course. You have to study the start. You have to study all the factors that are going to contribute to you having a great start. So the first thing that I would like to say for everyone that you need to do, absolutely have to do as a racer, is before the start you need to have a routine. All right? We usually do 5-minute start sequence, and within that 5 minutes we need to understand that there's a lot of things that can actually change from 5 minutes to 0. So what you want to do is create a routine, something that you can go by, something that you can stick by, so you have something that you can do over and over again and be comfortable with it. What I like to say is within the start sequence, depending on the time, there are certain things that you need to be doing, right? So for instance, something that you don't want to be doing is at 10 seconds before the start, you should not still trying to find a spot. At 5 seconds before the start, you should not be bailing home or things like that. So what I like to say is, before the start sequence and just as the start sequence starts, it's very important for you to try to figure out where you want to start and why. So a lot of things that you would do would be, one of the things I talk about is maybe taking a line sight. That's very important because that allows you to understand where the start line is. So for a lot of people, what is a line sight or a transit? You know, some people call it a transit. And a line sight is basically you finding out where the start line is. So when you're getting ready to do your acceleration off the start, you will know where the line is and not be over or not be too far behind the line. So the ways to do a line sight is very simple. I'll just draw it up the board real quick. What I like to do with line sights, I'll use this here as like a committee boat. Maybe I'll just use this. And this is your committee boat with your flag. And you can have another committee boat or a pin boat over here with another flag. And basically this is your start line. It's not very straight, but you know what I'm saying. So the first thing you need to do is, you have a boat that will go over here. And let's say that's X. And he wants to be completely in line with the flags on the boat. So one thing we need to always remember is, the persons who have the best understanding of where the line is the guys that are sighting the pin and the boat end. Okay? So in order for you to have a great start, you want to try and see if you can be one of these guys. So a line sight, basically what you're looking at is, I'll do some X's, maybe a building. This would be a building here in black. This would be another one here in red, right? So you have your building. This obviously only works when you're sailing close to land, when you can have a line sight. When you're on the ocean, when you don't have land close to you, it becomes a little bit more difficult, all right? So a line sight is basically a guy sitting in his boat, dead in line with the start, looking all the way down. And when he looks beyond this flag, he sees this red building, all right? This red building, right? And always remember, the higher the line sight is, in terms of a small tree compared to a high building, the higher it is, the better it is for you to see. Because depending on the boats that you're sailing, all right, there's times that the boats will be on the line, and because your line sight the object you're using is so small, you won't be able to see it. So if this is a high rise, it's easy for you to see above the mast of all the other boats. So the higher your line sight is, the better it is for you to be able to see it. So this is one line sight. So we'll say your line sight is from here all the way out to this red building. So when you're sitting on the start line, right, like that, depending on what you're sailing, you can now look and see where this building is. If this building is, if you're like upwind of you, then it means that you still have space to go, right? The other thing that you should do, a lot of people think, oh, I have the line sight, that's perfect. The other thing you should really do is to get a second line sight, which is, where do I want to be when I'm accelerating? Now, usually I would like to say maybe 5 boat lengths below the line. So what you do is you set up what you consider to be 5 boat lengths below the line, all right? And once you set up, you take a second line sight. And this line sight should go like this. Like that, right? So I'll move this back a little bit. And basically what that does, you can see where you're setting up and where this is. So as you set up here, you have a line sight that goes that way, and you have a line sight that goes straight across, telling you where the actual line is, which is here. Okay? So you always want to have like 2 line sights, not just one. You want to know exactly where the line is, and then you want to know exactly where you are, about 5 boat lengths below the line, so you know where you're setting up. The second thing that goes into this is your acceleration, right? So when you're sitting on the line here, 5 boat lengths away, it's very important that in the sequence, you're practicing your acceleration. So if I'm sitting here, and I need to hit the line right here and go, I need to know how long it will take me to get from here to the start, right? Now this may seem easy, but it's really not. There's a few factors that affects this. So on the start line, 2 things that affect your acceleration time is wind velocity, right? And the other thing is the phase of the wind. These are 2 big things. So what does that mean? Well, if I'm sitting here and I go close haul and 5 knots of wind, it may take me 10 seconds to get to the line, right? But if this is 20 knots, it may take me 3 seconds to get to the line. So that's how the velocity influences where you are and how fast you get to the start line. So if it's 5 knots, your acceleration time should be a lot sooner, and if it's windier, your acceleration time could be a lot later. All right. The other thing is the phase of the wind, right? We need to understand when we have boats, it's very, very important that we understand that the angle that the boat is sailing towards the start line, right, makes the time longer or shorter. So we'll have 2 boats here, and again, I'll draw a boat that's in, let's say, it's sitting 5 boat lengths away, and it's a right shift. What will happen with this boat, his angle will be sailing more directly over the line. But if you're sitting on the start line, same boat, but now you're in a left shift or left phase of the wind, your angle and your direction of sail will be more like this. So if you look directly, if you look at the angles here that's created, it is a lot faster to the line in the right shift than it will be if you're sailing in the left shift, right? So this is where your phase of the wind comes into play. So as I'm sitting on the start line, I know I'm 5 boat lengths away from the line, but I have to take into consideration, okay, is it windy? Is it light? Right? That determines the time it takes for acceleration because that changes. The second thing you need to think about is the phase of the wind, right? Am I in more of a right phase, which boats are sailed at an angle that is straight over the line, or I'm in a left phase where I need to sail at an angle that's a lot lower and might take 2 times the time to get from the 5 boat lengths to the start line. So when we're sitting on the line, first thing we need to understand is where the actual line is, right? So we need to do 2 line sights. We need to figure out exactly where the line is, right? So that you know whether you're over or not. and you need to do a line sight where you set up in an area where you know you want to accelerate from, right? Which I would recommend, depending on the boat you are, maybe 5 boat lengths or so from the line. Okay, so that's very important when it comes to like getting your homework done, trying to figure out certain things before the start. So that's line sight and how an acceleration, right? So based on your time and your distance, the wind speed and the angle, right? The other thing you want to talk about here is your boats around you. Okay, so yes, we know, okay, awesome, we know where the line is, we're great at that. We know how to accelerate, we're great at that, we know the timing. Well, one thing that really affects us is not being able to get off the line in a position to be able to hold the lane and keep going in a straight line. The guys who usually win a race or get to the top mark first are the guys who are able to start and not have to tap because of bad air or anyone getting into their way. Now, how do we do this, right? You don't get a prize for being the guy who sets up and knows all this information, right? The reward comes from at go when you get off that start line and you're the one who can sail and do anything you want to do. So if you think about a typical rabbit start, and I'll use this boat. We'll have a boat coming on starboard, and we'll have a few boats in a rabbit start. So blue will duck, or maybe we'll do the opposite way so it looks more like a start. So we have a boat coming on port, and we have the rabbit, duck, 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 and back. So this is what a rabbit start looks like when at go. So a rabbit start really mimics what a start line should be like at go. Now, in another rabbit start, a lot of us when sailing, we duck the rabbit, and if this person is too close to us right here, what happens? This guy immediately will go out the back, right? And the reason why is because of the wind zones. This guy is currently in what they call the back wind zone of the blue boat. Okay? So whenever you're starting, one of the most important things of having a good start is to create leeward space. As much leeward space as you could possibly get. So if I'm setting up and I have 4 boats right here, out of these 4 boats, based on leeward space, I would say this guy here, yellow 3, would be the guy in the best position, right? He has leeward space. This guy here, yellow here, is not really close to 4 blue, but it's pretty close to the point where if he just drops down a little bit, he now ends up in the backwind zone of the blue boat, and before long, a minute or so, he's gonna go out the back. Okay? So for me, as a coach, I think one of the most important things to have is leeward space. So keep that in mind. All the homework we just did about line sight and acceleration, they're all important things. But when you get on the start line, you need to really pay attention to the boats around you. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'll use the 2 black inflatables as like race committee boats and pin it, right? So these are our 2 boats. And one of the things that tend to happen, and I grew up in the Caribbean, I coached a lot of small group sailing because we don't have that many. But one of the things that I strongly believe in is, in order to be able to start with a big start line, with a lot of boats, you have to be able to start well with small groups, okay? So when the guys from the Caribbean comes down, you know, some may do either way. One, they may get overwhelmed by, oh my God, there's so many boats. Or 2, a lot of them may do very well because all they have to worry about is small packs. So if you have 100 boats on the line, to be honest, the only people you need to worry about is about the 10 boats that are just around. Because if I'm starting in this area, if I'm blue 4, and I have these 2 yellow guys, let me put this guy here. Right? These are the guys we're talking about right here. And I'm blue. All of these guys are at the pin, all of these guys are at the boat, right? So you have this huge start line, and you're worried about, am I gonna get a good start? If I start here, guys start at the pin very well, guys start at the boat very well, and I start a little bit further back with these guys, but I'm blue and I'm punched out. Do I get a good start? Yeah, I got a good start. The reason being is that this guy over here, he is so far away, he cannot affect me. This guy over here, he's so far away, he cannot affect me. If this guy has a really good start here, is he affecting me right now? Yes, he is, because he's so close. Now, he's giving me dirty ear. So really, what we need to worry about is not everybody else that are 30 boat lengths away from us, or 10 miles away from us. We just need to worry about the boats that are right around us. And I usually like to say on a big start line, I usually like to say 10 boats. Especially the ones directly to windward and to leeward. You have to be able to get a good start. So this guy, yes, could affect us, but this guy, green and yellow, can affect us a lot more than this guy can and this guy can. So you want to have a great start against the boats that are around you. I would say 8 to 10 boats. If you win the start with those 8 to 10 boats around you, right, then you'll have a good start. But you need to focus especially on the guys who are immediately to leeward and immediately to windward. Because now, one, if this guy accelerates ahead of you and he ends up here, now the wind is coming that way, the wind has to come through him to get to you. Dirty ear, you go out the back, right? If this guy, if you start very close to yellow, he's right next to you, most leeward boat, now you end up in his back wind zone. Too close to him, you're gonna go out the back, right? So what I'm saying is, the further away people are from you on the start line, the less they will affect you, okay? So, again, just to repeat, when you're on the start line, when it's big, you need to focus just on the boats around you. You need to focus on having a great start with the boats around you, not the guys that are super far away from you, okay? So basically what we'll have is another situation. So how do I have a great start with the boats around me? Now this is going to open a whole lot of situations here, right? So a lot of people, they just say, oh, get on the front row, accelerate, things like that, okay? It's a whole lot more to it than just that. So I like to say your positions with the boats around you are very important. So if I am the leeward boat, and I'll put a few situations here. I'll say this guy is the leeward boat, this guy is the windward boat. Now, how do I position myself with a guy to leeward? So if I'm windward, the first thing I need to get, and I mentioned it before, is as much windward space as possible, or much leeward space, I'm sorry, which is here, as possible. So if I'm here, I'm okay. If I start going further, closer and closer to this guy, my setup is getting worse as I get closer. To the point where I get so close that I end up in his backwind zone, and that's bad, right? So the more leeward space I can create, which is here, the better it will be for me. So, as a boat to windward of someone to leeward, I am the windward boat green. I first need to create as much leeward space as possible, as much. The second thing that I need to do is my position to where this guy is. So if this is the middle of this guy's boat, black line, if that's the middle of his boat, my bow should not be, or my bow should be even with the middle of his boat or forward of that. If my bow begins to fall behind the center of his boat, right, I am putting myself in a situation to end up in the backwind zone. So if I start the race like this, over time, you will fall off the back. If I'm here and I start right here, we both start like this, you can probably hold it. The more leeward space you have, the more safe you will be. So, as a windward boat, and just remember this, as a windward boat, you want to have as much leeward space as possible, and your bow needs to be positioned at the middle, or the center of that boat, or further forward, not further back. Okay? So, as a leeward boat, so let's say now we swap. Green is now the leeward boat, blue is the windward boat. This is what happens. So the opposite's going to work here. So now, you're the guy who's trying to get a good start, but you're to leeward. You're worried about blue. The way for you to get a really good start is, one, you want to be sneaky here. You want to minimize or make sure this guy, blue, does not get a good start. Now what do you have to do? You have to do the opposite. You have to minimize his leeward space. So if he ends up here, you know, within a minute or less, he will end up in your back wind zone. He goes out the back. So, for instance, if I'm on a start line, and I see this guy here, and he has all this windward space or leeward space, I know he'll probably get a good start. For me to minimize that, what I will do is do 2 tacks and come right here. Right? So the closer you can get this guy to windward of you, as close as possible to you, so that he now ends up in your back wind zone and goes out the back. Alright? So as a leeward boat, you want to minimize the leeward space of the boat to windward. Alright? The second thing you need to do is the positioning, right? So I spoke about where a person to windward should position himself. Second thing would be the same thing here. If this guy here, blue, who's now the opponent, you're the guy to leeward, if this guy, if his bow ends up past the middle of your boat on a start, what happens here, chances are is that he's going to end up covering you. The wind's going to go through him to get to you. You're going to go up the back. So you got to make sure that that does not happen. Now what you have to do is on the start line, you keep moving up on the start line, which is what we need to do. You have to also move up based on what the boats around you are doing. So if this guy is here and he starts going up and you realize, man, he's past the mid of my boat, you need to move up. Because if you accelerate like that, he will be on top of you, you will go out the back. So as a leeward boat, you have to make sure that the guy to windward, his bow is either equal to the middle of your boat or behind. If he's equal, it's okay, you can stay, that's fine. The minute he starts to get past that, it's beginning to get really bad. So equal to or further back, okay? So the leeward boat, you want to minimize leeward space of the windward boat, and you also want to make sure his bow does not pass the center of your boat. Because if it does, you're looking for him to be able to cover you, and now you go out the back. So you want to make sure his bow stays middle or further back of your boat while minimizing his leeward space. Then he will go out the back and you'll be free. Okay? So we spoke about a few things. We spoke earlier about the line sight. We spoke about acceleration in terms of where the line is, right? So when you find out where 5 boat lengths is or 3 boat lengths, you need to figure out how long it will take you to hit the line. We spoke about how that is affected by the velocity of the wind, how strong the wind is, and also by the angle of the wind, right? So all of these are things that are going into one start. Now we just spoke about the positioning of how you should position yourself around the boats or with the boats next to you to have a good start. The other thing is we spoke about how to just break the start down into just the boats around you as opposed to worrying about the boats that are everywhere. Okay? So again, the guy who's hitting the pin, even if he had a killer start and everyone's like a little further back, right? And the guy who just killed and won the boat end, these guys are clearly out front. They've got the best start, but if this is me in blue, punched out with the boats around me, this guy cannot affect me, that guy cannot affect me. You're too far away. I don't care what happens. If this guy is punched out on top of me, this guy can definitely affect me. I care what happens here because he's going to be slowing me down. So again, I stress, whenever you're on a big line, and you go to big regattas, 100 boats on the line, 80 boats, 50, whatever boats you have on the line, please do not worry about everyone else. Focus on the pack that's around you. And I like to say 8 to 10 boats. And if you win the start with those guys around you, you're fine. Because at the end of the day, the guys who can affect you the most are that pack around you, and specifically the guy immediately to windward and immediately to leeward. Okay? So that is very, very important. And then we spoke about the positioning of how we deal with the guys who are immediately to windward and the guys immediately to leeward, and positioning wise, what we want to do. As a boat to windward, you always want to have as much leeward space as possible. Now, when we're starting in races, there's a big mistake that a lot of sailors tend to make. And I think this is a big mistake because we just stressed about how important it is to have leeward space. All right? So let's say yellow 1 here, and this is a setup for the start. Everyone's setting up. Yellow one here has so much leeward space. That's good for yellow, right? So much leeward space. He's worked really hard to have this leeward space. A few seconds to go before the start, and yellow one does this. This happens a lot. He realizes this is your start line here. Very crooked one, but just for reference. He realizes, okay, it's 15 seconds to go. This is what yellow one does. He starts accelerating early. He does two things wrong. One, he accelerates down the line. 15, 10, 9, 8, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He turns up here. Right here. What did yellow one just do? Yellow one basically gave away all the leeward space he had when he was right here to sail down the line in acceleration to put himself here into blue's bad wind zone. What is going to happen to yellow one? He's going to go out the back. That happens every time. Again, the prize that you get or the reward that you get is not to do all the right things up until the last 10 seconds, right? So when you have the leeward space, you've accomplished the leeward, getting leeward space, the last thing you want to do is to give it up at go, which is what yellow one just did. 10 seconds to go, I'm going to accelerate down this way, I'm going to end up here. Right? A lot of people, 10 seconds to go, they go over the top of the fleet. That is a bad idea. Okay? Because if I'm blue here, and I see this guy coming this way, if this guy turns up here, what happens to me? Bad ear zone. I'm out the back. If this guy sees you coming, there's a chance, especially the penalty start, that this guy is going to be scared that you turn up in front of him. So what is he going to do? He's going to start coming up. And then he's going to push you over the line. You're out the race. Okay? So this, sailing down the line, I always think is a very, very bad idea for a few reasons. One, you are just eating up all that leeward space you spent so hard to create. Two, if you're coming over the top of people, right? They do not want you to turn up in front of them because now they're going to be in bad ear. So they're going to react to your movement, which in turn may turn you over the line. Okay? So the way you accelerate is not to sail down the line. Not to sail down the line. Okay? We just spoke about all the negatives that can do for you. When you accelerate, acceleration is when your race is starting. Okay? And when you start a race, for instance, your windward mark is up here. All right, that's a short course, but just for illustration purposes, your windward mark is here. The race is starting for you to go here, not over here. The windward mark is not over here. So there's no reason for you to accelerate sideways like that. Okay? So apart from the fact that you're eating up your leeward space, you're putting yourself at risk from getting pushed over the line, the last thing is, where are you really going? Okay? The race is starting for you to go up here. So when you accelerate, you want to accelerate up and over the line in the same position that you've set up. Okay? So when I accelerate, if I accelerated this way, I would still have my leeward space. I would still be in good situation. If I'm here and I accelerate that way, now I don't have my leeward space. Right? Now I'm in a bad situation. I just made a really good situation really bad. And what do? I give this guy a very good situation because now he has all the leeward space. Okay, so I really gave my race to that guy by doing that. Okay? So we need to understand these things. That's one of the things that I see quite a bit in all different classes of boats where a lot of people use their leeward space and they eat it up by accelerating the wrong way. Okay? So when you're accelerating, it's very important that you accelerate up and over the line, like this, in that direction, and not sideways. Okay? Up and over the line. Okay? We spoke about that. Now, one of the other things that I think is very important for sailboat racing, especially with big lines, is getting the time correctly. So my suggestion with that would be actually go over to the boat end, sit by the race committee boat, and get the time right on time. Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, I can get it down here. Okay, you're sitting on a coach's boat over here, you're talking to the coach, and the horn goes. How delayed do you think it takes for the sound from here to get to here? Pretty delayed, right? So your time will not be exactly correct. It's the same to say, if you're starting at the pin, or close to the pin, they blow the horn from the committee boat. Sound travels. Takes a while for it to get here. What I'm saying is, don't depend on the horn for your start. Use your watch. Or watches, plural. Right? The more watches you have that you can look at as a reference, the better it is. So I'm starting on the start line, and a lot of people do this where guide the boat, and I'm red 4. Okay? So I'm in the perfect position, but for some reason, I got my start sequence down here and not at the boat. So maybe I'm 1 second, 2 seconds off. This happens all the time. We're going to start, and this guy decides, oh, I'm going to wait for the horn. So everybody here around him, he's in the perfect position. He has great noise space. He's just waiting for the start, right? And then all of a sudden, these guys accelerate earlier than him and turns up. Because 1, his time may be wrong, or 2, he is waiting for the horn. These guys turn up based on their watch. He turns up based on the horn. That takes an extra second to get there. He turns up too late. This guy's covering him, he's too close to that guy, he goes out the back. Alright? So it's very important to understand getting the time from the race committee boat is super important, because that half a second or 1 second of the horn or the sound coming down here is super important. The second that you don't get the time right and you're looking at your time is super important. The other thing is also with acceleration, you do not want to accelerate at go. You don't want to go at 0. When your clock hits 0, that's not the time to turn up another line. I recommend that as you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, at 1, your bow goes up. Okay? Not at 0, because when you hear the horn, people turn up at 1, you're now turning up at go. 1 second late, everyone's top of you. It's very important that you maintain the position that you are in, setting up in the start, at go. Okay? So, just to recap that, very, very important to have the start on time, meaning right next to the committee boat. If you're sitting next to the committee boat, you can hear the PRO counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 minutes. You have the same time as this guy does, you have the same time as that guy. I can't say the same thing for the guy who's here chilling out with his coach, okay? Because he now is getting a time, or they are getting a time based on a horn sound that's been delayed for half a second or a second. Alright? So it's very important to do that, and we spoke about how it affects you with your acceleration. If you're a half a second off, or you're second off, or 2 seconds off, your acceleration would be delayed compared to the boats around you. And if the boats around you have the right time and you don't, what's going to happen? You're going to put yourself in a situation like this, and we spoke about this. This guy's covering you. This guy, you're now in his bad wind zone. Only option for you is out the back. Okay? So it's very important to understand how this affects you at the start. Right? I know that earlier we spoke quite a bit about what goes into having or executing a great start, or what are the elements that goes into having a perfect or really good start. So what I'll do is I'll just recap all the things that I spoke about, so that they can just be set with you, and you guys can kind of have an understanding of what we spoke about. So first thing we spoke about was developing a routine. Routine meaning understanding where, when, why you want to be in certain places or certain situations during the start sequence. Like for instance, what do I want to do at 5 minutes to what I want to do at 30 seconds before the start. At 5 minutes or so, you're still probably testing the course, testing the line, taking a line sight. At 30 seconds, you're thinking about your acceleration at only. It's very important to have the routine, because without the routine, then you end up doing certain things at times that you shouldn't be, and that can completely throw off having a great start. So one of the first things we spoke about was having a line sight. We spoke about taking 2 line sights. One that's about 5 boat ends below, so you know where you're setting up, and that helps you to determine your acceleration. The other one was the actual line sight of where the line is. Some people like to do a third one as well to see when you're over the line. So those are all good tricks that you can use. We also spoke about the type of line sights and what type of line sight's best. When you're close to land, the biggest thing to do is take a line sight with an object that is a highway. The bigger the object, the better it is. So a tree relative to a high-rise in a downtown area, something like that. Because based on the size of the boats that you're sailing, there are many times where there are boats on the start line that are blocking your view of your line sight because your line sight is too small for the object that you're using. So the larger the object is that you're using for your line sight, the better it will be for you. All right? We spoke a little bit about starting sequence. We spoke about, I spoke about how important it was to be able to be at the race committee boat getting the countdown as they start and blow the horn for the sequence. We also talked about how important it is not to depend on the horn and go by the flag, right? Or use your watch. So, you know, getting the start sequence at the race committee boat is more effective, more accurate than it would be if you're sitting on your coach boat below the line and getting the start sequence. The time that the sound for the horn gets to you at that point is a lot more delayed than it would be if you were actually at the boat. So all this to say, getting the time accurately by going to the race committee boat and getting it right on time is very, very important for having a good start, because that affects your acceleration if your time is off based on the other boats around you. The other thing I spoke about was also acceleration, right? Once you figure out where you are on the line and you know exactly where the start line is, it's very important for us to understand how long it takes us from point A, which is where we're sitting, to point B, which is where the actual start line is. So once you're sitting on the start line, it's very important for you to understand how long it will take you from point A, which is where you're sitting on the start line, to point B, which is where the actual start line is. So what we do and what we talk about is velocity of the wind, whether or not the wind is 5 knots or 20 knots, or 2, the angle or the phase that the wind is in, right? So basically, very common that you think you sit on the line. It may take you 10 seconds, 5 boat ends away, to accelerate 10 seconds to hit the line at go, where in 20 knots, it will take you 3 seconds, right? So once you know where you're sitting on the start line, and you have an idea of how far away you are, then you have to start thinking about how windy it is. How long will it take me to actually get from where I'm sitting to hitting the line on time? And the wind affects that, right? Obviously, very simple, the lighter the wind, the slower you will get to the start line. The heavier the wind, the faster you will get there. So that is very important. The other thing you have to think about is the wind phase, your angle to the line. If you're in a right shift sitting on the start line, your angle will sail you more directly over the line, okay? Or perpendicular to the line is the angle that you will sail. But if you're in a left phase or a left shift, when you're accelerating, your angle then will be sailing you more parallel to the line. So basically, based on those 2 angles, it will take you a longer time in the left shift to get to the start line than it would in the right shift. So the 2 things that will affect your acceleration time, or that you need to put into your acceleration, or think about when accelerating, is where you're sitting on the line, how far away you are, how windy it is, and also the phase of the wind, right? So that's acceleration. Now we spoke a little bit about all of that is great, but in terms of the boats around you, how important that becomes, right? So I basically said that a lot of people get really overwhelmed with the number of boats sitting on the start line, all right? And I say you shouldn't. The reason for this is we need to understand that a boat who's starting 30, 40 boats away from us on either side cannot affect us because they're too far away. So what we need to focus on is the small group of boats that are around us, which is 8 to 10 boats, right? We focus on those guys. If we get a really good start against those boats around us, we still have a good start. Because the boats that are not very close to you cannot affect you. So those 10 boats that you're around, okay, if you get a really good start with those guys, then you're in clear air, you have all the options in the world. No one's affecting you, no one's sitting on your wind, no one's giving you dirty air, you're not in anyone's back wind zone. So you need to really focus on the boats around you, the 8 to 10 boats around you, having a good start against those guys. And most importantly, the guys that are closest to you, which are the guys immediately to leeward and the guy immediately to windward, right? So those guys that are immediately to leeward and windward of you are the ones who can affect you the most. So you really need to not focus on the other 80 boats in the fleet, but just focus on the 10 that's sitting around you, no matter where on the start line you are. Okay, so what you really need to do in starts, sailing is already very complex, and the last thing you want to do is to make it even more confusing. Simplify it, right? So you have 100 boats, focus on the 10 around you. That's all that matters. The other guys, they won't affect you. You're too far away. So you just need to focus on those guys. Positioning wise is another thing, right? We spoke about sailors liking to sail down the line, okay? We spoke about how important it is to have a leeward space. Leeward space is super important to have a great start. The more leeward space you have, the more you're able to have options, the more you're able to sail for a long time after go without being forced to tack. Okay? If I have a lot of leeward space and at 10 seconds, 15 seconds, I start to accelerate, and instead of accelerating over the line, I accelerate down. Now I'm sailing down to the guy who's to leeward of me. I just closed all that leeward space I've worked really hard to achieve. Okay? So the idea is not sail down and accelerate down, it's to sail up and over the line. The other negative about sailing down the line is that the person who's to leeward of you will see you coming and will be scared that you're going to start right in front of them. So instead of them staying there, they're going to come and they're going to try and attack you. While doing that, they could push you over the line. It's very risky, okay? So the idea is to create a lot of leeward space, but also to accelerate up and over the line, not down the line. Let's remember, the windward mark is upwind, not sideways, not where the pin is. So it's no reason for you to be sailing, reaching down towards the pin, right? You're getting ready to start the race where the first mark is upwind. So you need to accelerate up and over the line, not sideways. In terms of positions with the boats around you, we spoke about two different scenarios. One when you're the leeward boat, one when you're the windward boat. So as a windward boat on a start line with a boat to leeward of you, the first thing we spoke about was having leeward space. It is very important to have leeward space. The more leeward space you can create, the better it will be for your start. The other thing is, after accomplishing your leeward space, is where are you positioned relative to that guy to leeward of you? Now, as a person to windward, it is very important for you to understand that your bow should be at the person's midship or the center of their boat or further forward, not backwards. If your bow is falling behind the center of their boat, you are now putting yourself in a position to be in their back wind zone at go, and immediately you will get shot out the back. Okay? So as a windward boat, you need to create as much leeward space as possible. You also need to make sure that you're positioned correctly relative to the guy to leeward of you, whereas your bow should be at their midship or the center of their boat or further forward. As a leeward boat with a guy to windward of you, you want to do the opposite, right? You want to be in control of the situation. So what you need to do is you need to minimize the leeward space that that guy to windward has, that opponent, right? When you minimize his leeward space, he's going to get shot out the back because he will be in your back wind zone. The other thing is, when you set up with this guy that's to windward of you, what you need to do is you need to make sure that this guy's bow does not pass your midship or the center of your boat. You keep his bow at center or further back. If his bow is further back, bad for him, good for me. If his bow is further forward than not my center line, now it's becoming a situation where it may be bad for me. So, very important for us to understand, based on the boats around us, how we should be positioned. I think those were the very, very important points of this whole talk. Hopefully it was able to help a lot of people. I think it was a lot of information for everyone to kind of digest. And I hope that it's something that you guys can use going forward and it helps everyone out.